Have you ever wondered what the difference is between an Android head unit and a Linux-based head unit? I have. So today we're going to be taking a look at the differences between this Android head unit and this Linux-based head unit to find out what the performance differences are and, well, which one you should get. Now this is a 10-inch Android head unit that we have over here, and this is a 7-inch Linux head unit. They're both by a company called Eonon. Now you might be wondering, why Eonon? Well, if you watch the channel, you know that I have reviewed another Eonon Android head unit, and I absolutely love it. In fact, it is still used in my Lincoln to this day, and I've had absolutely zero issues with it. Since that's the case, I decided to get both an Android and a Linux-based unit for the channel. Now, I don't really care about the boot up times of these, even though it was a measure of performance, because you're not really ever going to be booting these up. They're going to be coming up from a standby. But I do want to talk about the front face, and this is the Linux-based one, and as you can tell, it's a little bit smaller of a screen, but it does have physical buttons, such as the volume control, which for some people, that is a mandatory. It also has a power button, and then it has some USB ports as well as an aux. So if you are the type of person that likes to use these a lot, these are highly accessible on the Linux-based unit. That's not nearly the case when we take a look at the Android-based unit. You do get the much bigger screen, and that screen does rotate up, down, left, and right, so that way you can angle it towards the driver if you want it. But as far as buttons go, they are just touchscreen buttons with a more modern look. It's a very sleek look, kind of like what you got on your newer cars. And these are just touchscreen for power, home, back, volume, up and down, and it does have a built-in microphone. If we turn this around, if we take a look at the back of the Linux, it is much cleaner looking. It just has one USB port, which is wired, and that can be for charging. It does have your main wiring harness, but other than that, everything is inset right here with all of your RCAs. It's a very clean look. On the other hand, the Android, well, that is quite a little bit messier. It looks clean when there's nothing hooked up, but as we start adding connections, we're going to see that, of course, it has the main wiring harness, and it has all of your RCA cables, which are part of this wiring harness. And you can plug up all the wiring harnesses at top. Luckily, you only have to plug up the ones that you will be using. On the left-hand side, though, it does have a bunch of spots here, and these are for all of your antennas. Now, you probably don't have to hook up really many of these, or any, but it does have them, like a GPS and a Wi-Fi, and it even has a SIM card attachment. Now you might be wondering what this is all for. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But before we get into that, let's take a look right here. It does have an HDMI out, and that is for a secondary monitor. Now the interesting thing about the Linux one is it does have those two video outputs, but those are the much older RCA standard, once again for an external monitor if you want to hook those up. Now if you are going to be hooking up external amplifiers, the Android one is really the way to go. It does have RCA outputs for both your front and rear speakers as well as your subwoofer out, where the Linux-based unit only has a subwoofer out, so you're not going to be using external amplifiers with the Linux-based one. Once we turn these on, we're going to look at the screens. Both are QLED screens. The Android is a little bit bigger, so it does have higher definition at 1280 by 720, while the Linux is just 1024 by 600. Although they both use a QLED screen, the Android is much more vivid and dynamic, and it has a higher contrast, making the colors pop more, which is not only important when you're using your navigation, but it's also important when you want to use the Android to watch movies and TV shows. And we'll have a little bit more on that in just a minute. But first, let's talk a little bit more about why you would use either one of these, which is Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. The Android Auto and Apple CarPlay experience is just a little bit different. On the Linux-based system, it works exactly like you would have in a new car. It connects right to your phone as soon as you get in, assuming you've already paired to it. So if you've added a new car that has Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, it's going to react exactly the same way. The Android is just a little bit different. It uses a third-party app like all Android devices do, and this one is called Z-Link. It will connect to the Z-Link party app, and then it will start Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. But as soon as it connects to it, the experience is exactly the same way on both units. You can use your voice control to navigate, to send text messages, to make phone calls. You can even tell it to play radio stations on Pandora, making both of these units very safe and keeps your eyes on the road and not on the unit. Now, speaking of that, we should talk about the operating systems. Of course, this is a Linux-based system, which is bare bones. If we take a look at your home, it doesn't have anything really to it. It has MirrorLink, AirPlay, phone. There's just not much to it. It works really just like a standard car stereo. There is some customization, like if we go to settings, that one home screen, we can change the color of that if we'd like to. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Now on the Android, that's a lot different. The Android experience is just like what you would have on your phone. You can come in here and you can go to your Google Play Store and you can download apps, you can play video games, you could even watch television. And speaking of watching television, this one actually has Netflix pre-installed, which is really hard for most manufacturers to have on their head units. And with some head units, it's actually impossible to get Netflix on there. So the fact that this has it on there is really cool. So let's talk about connectivity. When you connect to Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, it's your phone that is doing all the work. This doesn't need internet. It's just receiving a signal. Think of it as like a different monitor basically for your phone. It's just interpreting the data that your phone is sending to it. And that's the same with the Android when you're using Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Since the Linux doesn't do any apps or anything else, it doesn't need any other connectivity options. Android does, and that's because we can download apps, watch shows, and play video games. But because you want to be able to do that, you need some connectivity to the internet. Now you could do that in one of a few ways. Remember, this does have that SIM card reader. Now, a SIM card reader, you could put a SIM card in this and treat this just like a phone or a tablet, and it would have internet as long as you have cell phone service. Some people will use it in that manner, but most people that are using this for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are probably going to take the second option. If we go into our settings, we do have a setting for network and internet connection, and we can connect to a Wi-Fi network. Now, that could be like your home network or a free service outside a coffee shop or something like that. The other option is to take your phone and use it as a wireless hotspot, which I have done on numerous occasions where it's safe to do so to watch shows, because let's be honest, it is so much nicer watching shows on a 10-inch screen versus, well, whatever size screen my phone is. And because this does use Android, this does have a lot of customization options. You could change your wallpaper, you could change your theme even if we go in here and we like a different theme. Like this theme looks really nice. I could go ahead and hit Set Launcher, and when I do that, we have our new launcher set up. And of course, you can change the colors of your buttons. There is a lot of customization that you can do to the Android head unit that you just can't do to the Linux-based unit. Since we're talking about car stereos, to talk about its sound quality. And with the sound quality, I really just want to go over the EQ settings that each one has. If we go into our main settings on the Linux base, we do find our EQ underneath sounds. We actually don't go to settings for the Android. For the Android, we just go to Amplifier, which is an app. Now, both of these do have EQ settings, which are fairly similar as far as your settings if you want to go to rock or classic or electric or pop or jazz or even a user setting. Now, interestingly enough, the Android does have user 1, 2, and 3 settings on all of their options that you can change. Really, the EQs, there's not much of a difference at all as far as your settings. Now, I first started talking about how I like the bigger screen of the Android. Interestingly enough, they are now running that bigger screen on the Linux-based system. And don't worry about having to find it. I'm going to show all of the links to all these products I'm talking about in the description of the video, so make sure to check that out. But if you want the larger screen on the Linux, you can now get that 10.1 screen, which does have that more modern look. Now, it should be apparent to you by now that the Linux-based system is designed for like a daily driver, someone that just wants to add Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. They don't care about upgrading or updating of the system. In fact, I have never seen a Linux-based head unit like this ever get an update. Now, that's good news for those that just want this for a daily driver. That means that it should treat you the exact same from day 1 to year 5 down the road. There's no updates that are going to slow down the system over time, and that's a good thing. Now the Android, on the other hand, is a little bit different. The Android has actually already received an update. In fact, this now has Android 13 on it, which is, as far as I know, the first head unit to use Android 13. So that is a pretty big deal. On top of that, you can download apps like we talked about beforehand. With downloading apps comes great responsibility, in the essence that you could potentially slow down your system over time, meaning the more apps and the more updates that you put onto it, well, the hardware may not be able to keep up with that. Now, having said that, the way that I've used my Android head unit, I have not had that issue at all. But keep in mind, I really use Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, and a few small apps like Fruit Ninja and Netflix. I'm not really downloading a ton of apps. All right, guys, that's your basic difference between a Linux and Android head unit. If you like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and don't forget to like the video. This is Toyd's DIY Audio, and I'm out.